But we've kind of evaluated, and we think we've got some solutions that are going to kind of fit the project and fit the bill for this, and we're going to get into those in a little bit. So these are kind of trees that are constrained by soil. Those are really the trees that are in tree pits. You know, kind of they're in hardscape, and the original design had sidewalk or brick around those. So that gives you a sense of that. And I think that was, if I remember my numbers right, was about 60% of our trees were in this condition. Sort of, you know, it's the heart of the downtown, the village area. So I think it was striving for a little more of a, I won't say urban, but kind of a village feel. And then there were opportunities for larger trees, particularly at the east and west gateways, where you come into town, where you kind of have lots of large, you know, natural trees on the road edge. They're sort of all over in a natural formation, but where there's opportunity here, particularly where Charter Road goes into the school complex, and over here in front of the shopping center, where we can kind of supplement that. There's more room to grow, and so we have a little more freedom to plant larger trees there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Bob, and he's going to kind of discuss how the design is going to respond to some of these challenges and opportunities. It's left and right is forward, and that's the pointer. That's the self-destruct.
So, thank you. So it's been a bit of a long, hot summer, so we thought we might just give you a little hint of the autumn to come ahead of us, and found some beautiful portrait pictures of trees that we think that might, among others, might be appropriate to use here. And so, you know, from our standpoint, Ron just defined areas where the conditions of the roadway project and the sidewalks and the way it's designed leave lots of room for big trees. And we have duly noted that there are some truly fantastic trees out here. And some of them we've been charged with attempting to save. Others are unfortunately going to have to be removed in order to build the project. So we're going to basically be looking at planting a new generation of trees out here, as well as creating a treed environment through the whole Kelley's Corner area. So, you know, the first thing that really jumps out to us is the legacy trees that we see out there are almost all red oaks. There's something about the soil here, something about the environment. I don't know what it is that causes those oak trees to grow to 3 feet and 4 feet in diameter. They're truly magnificent. So, so that is a sort of a foundation of what we call the landmark trees that we think would be a part of the new generation of trees out here. But there's also other opportunities, and also trees that don't necessarily get to be 4 feet in diameter in 200 years. So, so we just using some examples on that. You know, the Freeman maple, which is sort of a hybrid of red maple and silver maple, has wonderful character. It's a little more compact in its form, so therefore we can translate that into potentially an area of a little more constrained soil environment. The red oaks, you know, they're going to need half of this room for soil in order to thrive, but others can be in a more constrained situation. Right outside my house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, there's a honey locust that's about 35 feet tall, probably 12 inches in diameter. It's growing out of a 3-foot grass strip. Now it's taking the sidewalk with it for a little bit, but you know, there are trees that are very adaptable. And so these are some of the trees that we're thinking about as sort of foundation trees for the sort of larger tree statement. There are many others, and what we're doing at this point is the town has a list of sort of approved or sanctioned street trees. We're working with the DOT because they have a list of preferred trees. And then we're just doing a bit of a review of the literature for other communities around here. Many of them become the same. You know, in this mix could be potentially some of the Dutch elm resistant elms, which are, you know, that fantastic sort of canopy shape. So we're going to be developing this is sort of the foundation of thought process about how to handle street trees. The most important thing relative to trees as Ron went over, is that we have basically two sides of almost every street in the project, and one side has power lines and the other side doesn't. One side has a constrained space with soil in the hardscape, the other side does not in many cases. And so we have this sort of two-sided look to it. And we're trying to find a way in the overall design of all the streets and the sidewalks and you know, the sort of the creature comforts of public spaces along it to reconcile the difference between trees through other means of continuity. But just so that we know, the smaller trees are not a consolation. They're truly fantastic unto themselves. And if you look at flowering crab apples, red buds, service berries, Japanese tree lilac, and there's a number of others. You know, the presence of flower, berry, you know, seasonal, you know, we get 3 seasonal delights out of most of these trees, which is a really good thing. That's certainly what George and I were taught in graduate school, that every plant you plant has to have 3 good seasons and maybe even another one. So this is sort of our sort of power line side of the street, but for the presence of the power line, we're offering all sorts of eye candy with color and texture and flower and smell, and all the senses come alive. So that's really a look at street trees. Now we're going to go next to basically the composition of the street design. And so one of the things that we're looking at is the original design had continuous brick paved strips along the road. And we have a challenge because if we're going to also have space for the trees to grow, we actually needed to make those brick areas get smaller, because if we have, say, a 4-foot or 5-foot strip between the sidewalk and the street, and we want to have room for the trees, if we just cut out a box for every single tree and then have brick in between every one, and then the bricks actually became more basically concrete paving as a result of decisions about the paver sort of situation. So we kind of said, okay, the brick is getting smaller, and when we actually looked at sort of how it would arrange itself along, you know, we did some little example sketches along different parts of it, and we started having trouble making the continuous line actually work. So we're trying a different approach here, and so that's why we're here. Calling this a progress report, and this is to, you know, take your temperature on how you feel about this. It is a little different direction, but it is something that we're kind of getting excited. We're excited about because, as I mentioned, the pattern of trees is going to be different on each side of the street. And we're looking for that sort of equalizing factor. And so what we think is that could potentially happen on the pavement level as you're walking down the street. So there's 2 parts of what's going on here. The DOT has basically said the sidewalks have to be concrete. And in most cases, they're going to be just a fairly traditional concrete sidewalk. But then we'd like to make that sidewalk nice and special. And so what we're looking at is, rather than a thin brick strip that we then have to cut up into tree areas, is actually take the width of the sidewalk and sort of a pad on each side. And actually what becomes sort of an equalizing component on this is that our spacing of the street lanterns is actually the most regular and predictable sort of constant. Consider that like the metronome. If you're a musician, it's kind of the beat. And so that, and they alternate on both sides of the street. It's kind of a nice sort of, you know, sort of a back and forth. It's a little bit of a, I don't know, call it a contra dance or something like that. So that back and forth as a concept for how to bring color and variety into breaking up an ordinary looking concrete sidewalk and making it special is we actually get a number of layers. So this is just the layout of the paving as we're suggesting it here. And then this drawing over here shows starting to mix in some of the different kinds of trees. You can see we're a little bigger on this side of the street. We've got a little more I think we have a little bit more, well, we have more room because we don't have power lines, but here's, this side of the street would be where the power lines are, and we're looking at, more the sort of smaller type of trees. And then this is just a little trial, because while this is sort of an idealized picture of it, we've got driveways and other driveways, and we've got a variety of things, conditions out there that actually break up the pattern of what the sidewalks and everything look like. So this is sort of our sort of a philosophical design theme, and then this is an example of how we think we might be able to sort of deploy it as a design strategy. And I'm just going to take you through a series of images here that just sort of show that playing itself out, getting a little bit larger here. So an individual pad with a street light is here. Here's another pad that has some sort of accent seating, or sort of call them creature comforts or street furniture along the road. We'd like to think that there will be places on the backside of the sidewalk where either the voluntary participation of the abutter or the extent of the right-of-way allow us to do some things on the backside. We know there probably aren't a whole lot of people that want to sit in a 5-foot space between the sidewalk and moving vehicles, although we have a great advantage with the new street, because we have the bicycle lane that's going to push all the vehicles a lot further away from you on the sidewalk, and there'll be a layer of vegetation and trees and other things in between you. I'm going to keep going, and then I promise you will be first. Is that okay? I do. Hold me to it. So this is just looking a little bit closer. Creature comforts with bench, and we're looking at some kind of articulation of some of these spaces here. And this is again we're still in sort of formative points about this for how to deploy. And so here now we've added in the trees. You can start to see it fills out. You can see the contra dance going back and forth here of the paving patterns, and then the nice smooth walking surface in between for the traditional sidewalk. So now we can go in. Now we're sort of popped out the sunroof of a car here because we're in a slightly elevated condition, but you can see the scale of the street in this, with the bicycle lanes on each side, the width of the road, the setback from the curb in grass strips. So what we get is, if we combine the 4 or 5 foot space between the sidewalk and the curb, and then if we combine the soil area of a linear strip, is we get sort of a value added for soil content for the tree growing. So rather than one 4 by 10 foot piece, we may get a 4 foot by or 5 foot by 30 or 40 foot piece, in which is a much more robust soil environment for the trees to actually live more than 5 years. So this is just looking at some of the pieces of that. Here's one of the sitting areas on the side, and you can just see the trees and everything are sort of get decapitated at the top, but really we just wanted you to feel like the scale of the street itself. Now this is important because we're taking the existing street and widening it 5 feet in each direction from its current width, so it's going to get wider. And so, but that space is being given over to the bicycles with the striped bicycle lanes. And we did note that a very similar condition to this is to be found on South Main Street, sort of heading south out of the village. So there's a continuity of these kind of bike lanes in this area with other parts of the town. So, people are a little worried about the red. And that, I know that looks really red. It's not maraschino cherry, but it's pretty darn close. One of the challenges with concrete and coloring it to look like something different than concrete is that it changes over time, and it's hard to control it. And sometimes it looks truly, truly awful. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen here, because we've seen red sidewalks Sidewalks poured in concrete, dyed to look red, stamped to look like bricks, and 20 years later, 10 years later, they look like Pepto-Bismol, and they really look vile. And so we don't want that to happen to you folks. So we have a variety of this is sort of a Chinese menu. I get all the colors, so, you know. So this is sort of a bit of a Chinese menu of other options that we have to think about. And so we have a variety of materials that we can consider. So if you go into Boston, you go to Northeastern to the new engineering center, right out front is kind of a nice combination of a traditional brushed concrete sidewalk, and next to it is a very nice, it's called exposed aggregate. It's fine stones that are mixed in with the concrete, and it looks like a sort of a crushed gravel like surface, but it's really quite elegant, almost like a garden walk, only it's concrete and it's really rugged. So that's one possibility, and the possibilities of stone color and texture and size, all is, we have, you know, we can go to gravel pits all over the region and find every different one. Every gravel pit is going to have a different color of gravel that could be potentially the color of that stone. And you can see over here, here's just some examples of how that could be deployed. We also have, there are companies that make concrete coloring, and that comes in two ways. There can be staining, which basically sort of squeegees in a penetrating stain of color that you can see, sort of that brownish. It's sort of like if you had white shoes and you wanted to make them brown for the evening. You get the shoe polish out and you really rub it in, and then they're brown. But there's still traces of other color that come through, so it's a stain, it's more of a transparent color tint. There's also colored concrete, which we've got a box over here, so it's over there by my bag, of truly fully colored through the entire concrete, in which at the concrete plant, the colors are injected in either into the truck or into a batch, and you get an entire truck of red of all of these colors here. And so that's possible also. It is hard with this in particular. If you have to cut a panel out, it's hard to match a patch panel in the future. If you have to cut out for an electrical line or a sewer line or something like that, that is a challenge. And so that's one of the reasons why we're thinking of doing these more like thumbprints. That's the contra dance part, because it's just it's a single block and it's that color in that place. The likelihood of having to go and actually cut that out and fix it and match it to a patch in the future is significantly diminished, as opposed to a quarter of a mile of red stripe, you know, red strip. So these are some of the materials, approaches that we're thinking about. So now I'm just going to take you through some eye candy on this, just looking on one side of the street. So we're on the sort of power line side of the street, somewhat as a generic condition. Don't worry, we're not talking about doing 2- and 3-story flat roof buildings in the background. They're just sort of filler in the back of the model, just so that it doesn't disappear into blue sky, because you all know there are buildings out there. But so this is looking at, you know, this is still sticking with red as sort of a stained concrete panel. This one is really hard to read, but this could be, you know, the exposed aggregate, and again, there could be a spectrum of color opportunities with that. We can do with darker grayish stains, you know, sort of keeping it really subtle, because we got sort of a light gray on the sidewalk, a dark, and really what we're after is sort of this punctuation. You know, it's like the bass drum. It still continues along, and it becomes a rhythm, a very consistent rhythm, because if we place this at every light pole, those light poles through most of the corridor at this point, we've got them set at about 60 feet apart. They may be 70, but you know, they're pretty close together. So as you're driving through, there's going to be sort of a doot, 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 doot kind of rhythm of color, light, and the break in the grass. So actually what we're talking about is almost sort of a mirror picture of whereas the brick was continuous, now the grass or a planted edge, could be a garden-like edge with flowers, things like that, along the continuity of the street. We can do picture frames around them and then insert a panel. We got something like this going into a park project right now. They're going to do a sort of an exposed aggregate on the outside and then do sort of a smoother sort of sidewalk panel down the middle. Kind of excited about how that's going to come out. This is, again, these are all quite subtle, with the staining around the outside, exposed in the middle. And we're not decided on any of these. This is just to give you a sense of the possibilities that we have. Okay, so that's the streetscape: sidewalks, street trees, lights, and the sort of accent panels along the curb. As Ron mentioned, each of the gateways has a median for traffic calming and as a welcoming gesture into the Kelley's Corner district. And we're pretty excited about these also. The town is basically said, we will maintain these. It's important for the DOT to hear that, because the DOT does not want to maintain flower beds in the middle of a road. So that's important. So this is, sort of a typical situation of the median and the approach, striping on either side. And the traffic calming happens because we have a little curve over here that just like a sort of an approach ramp onto a highway, if you go around a curve, you tend to slow down a little bit, unless you're one of those kind of drivers. And I met a couple coming down through Carlisle this afternoon. The curvier the road that got fast, the closer to my bumper they got. So this is basically for traffic calming and for planting in the center, again, as a welcoming gesture to the district. So here's a modeled rendering view of it with the approach and the flower beds in the middle. Our sense is different towns do this different ways. Some have garden clubs who bring carloads of annuals and they wait on the sidewalk, and then they have designated people to go into the middle. That's a really hard way to go. That's a lot of annuals, and they all get thrown away after the first frost. So we kind of like the idea of maybe it's perennials. And so, we have wonderful choices of perennials with great seasonal variety. So all of these have 3 good seasons worth of life and visual interest. And the idea would be to have a flow of color, texture, that could really be long lasting. Probably in the end, somebody's going to be out there in probably the late March and give it a shave and a haircut so it's ready for the next year. There are even woody plants like bayberry, red osier dogwood that will withstand being in the middle of a street. It's a lot of wear and tear for some plants, and some don't hold up very well, but those will. They'll take the salt. They'll take the wear and tear, being buried in snow and ice. So that's the medians. So our next area is at the intersection. Does everybody know where this is? This is basically the intersection. This is going up the hill to the schools. This is Mass Ave would be coming right along here. So there's a corner park that was designated in the original plan, in the vision plan. And so we've had an opportunity to noodle with this a little bit. And so basically what we have is, on the backside, we have the parking lot in front of the Verizon building. And then we've got the curve of the road of the intersection. So there's a sidewalk as a part of the project that would be built around the corner. This way, heading south on South Main Street, is pretty flat. And then by right here, it starts to go up and get steeper and steeper, such that from here to here, we have about 6+ feet of elevation change. So the concept sketch in the original vision plan didn't really deal with the elevation change, but we have to. So what we've looked at, we've kind of listened to what the topography is telling us. Is nice smooth grade on the sidewalk coming around the corner. And then we think we can take sort of a series, let's do the math on it, it's 6 feet of grade change. If you want to have like a transition that people could sit on and have like a stone wall or something like that, let's figure, 18 inches or 2 feet at a time. We can do it into basically 1, 2, 3, layers of seating wall. In each of those seating walls, so this is, we're at, let's just say we're at elevation 0 here. We're at elevation 2 here, and that has a nice sort of flat area that you can walk in from at elevation 2. You come around the corner, it gets a little steep on the corner, you come in here at elevation 4, come back out and you head up the hill, and then elevation 6, ends up, kind of up here. So we let a seating wall be the transition in this sort of cascade-like look going down the hill, and we can have planting areas on the uphill side of them. Maybe have some kind of a stone wall that people can sit on. Maybe we'll fit that wall with some like wood slat seating so it's not so cold as a piece of stone. And connect them a little bit with a set of stairs, at least from the lower level to the mid-level, so that people can sort of do a little bit of a loop through. But each of these levels that we have, 0, 2, 4, and then up the hill, each of these needs to be handicapped accessible so that everyone in your community can get into this park and enjoy it. So this is really just looking at the park in the corner. We have a constraint right here, and it's roughly this sort of S-turn space here that is pretty much the expectations of Verizon in terms of how much of their property we're going to be working with them to secure the right-of-way to be able to do this. We have some ideas about that, but and then on the back side, because we're going up in elevation, 0, 2, 4, 6, is we got to hold the whole thing up on the back, and so there's a wall back there of some shape or form. And material that we're working on, what is appropriate and affordable. So this is a little sketch of it off on the side here, and you can see we're sort of working with the elevation changes. In this case, I'm actually showing sort of a wooden seat, and this has a little bit more sort of walkway around the back. This was done, there's been several iterations of these, and they haven't all caught up with each other by this afternoon at 6:30 to get over here in time. So this is our idea for how to approach this park in here. We did walk a variety of options through a staff and review committee, and they suggested that this would really be sort of a desirable one to advance. So, and this is looking at it in location. So again, we got Mass Ave coming through, the traffic lanes coming down the hill. Here's a grass strip along the street where we can have street trees, good-sized street trees here. We think we can pull the sidewalk a little further away from the curb and have continuous planting. So actually, the one thing we're excited about is that the buffer space between the sidewalk and the curb for the entire frontage of the park will have between 6 and 8 feet of separation to the street. So it will be more of an enclave, and I'm pretty excited about that also. Okay, lighting. So the world now does pretty much all street lighting in LED. The day of the shoebox, thankfully, is virtually over. And so, and walking out of Better Than Your Average Joe's and looking up and seeing those big clunky, 2-foot square rectangular metal boxes that hold their lights, are just like, I'm glad that we're doing LED. So we're offering, just as suggestions here, some approaches on lighting. And so as Ron mentioned, the LED technology gives you a different kind of light than what you may have thought of in the past. If you drive through downtown Lexington or Arlington or some other places around where there's basically the acorn globe traditional street lamp, it doesn't work for LED. And the reason is the LEDs are intense, and they basically hit the globe. No matter how refined a globe, the lens design of the globe is, it takes the light and it just explodes into this sort of snowball of illumination. And so the globe has kind of got to go with LED. People that are retrofitting old lights and keeping the globe and putting LEDs are, they're not happy, because they didn't make a great decision. So the first thing that happens as we look at these is basically we have a cap at the top that has the LED pack in here. And some of these LED packs are very ingenious. This one here has actually silicone eyelids that you can adjust to adjust the cutoff of the light. So we have two different approaches here that we're looking at. This one here is, I guess I would call it a little more of a traditional look, where it has some styling at the top on the cap that one would think, I don't want to call it historic or Victorian, but it has some style to it. And you could, and maybe it has some fluting at the bottom. It's a pretty straightforward, straight tube pole. This one is fit up for brackets for banners, and it's got like outlets in case someone wants to have a party out there, charge their computer. And this one here is more, let's call it a contemporary fixture. I would call it somewhat of a stylish neutral, because it's a very simple pole, and then the armature of the top is really, is also quite simple, but it's, let's call it mid-century modern, because that's kind of okay, let's not call it mid-century modern. We don't have any vomiting in the front row here. So there's two reasons why here. There's look and feel. The photometrics of two fixtures like this are almost the same in terms of the character of light that they give off and the amount of spacing that we would do. We're thinking that the spacing is 12 or 14 feet high, which is lifting up a little bit higher because the LEDs, again, are very intense, and the more you lift them out, the smoother the light gets on the walkway. So looking forward to that. And so these are just two examples of fixtures that we're talking about. What I would say is this is between 30 and 50% more money than that. And the differences in price are going to be part of the town and the DOT's agreements on cost share on the project. So we feel an obligation to present one light fixture. This is of a comparable price to a garden variety shoebox fixture, plus a little bit probably. So this is a competitive priced fixture. This has sort of a designer or historic sort of value added to the cost of it. And I don't want to underestimate, we have a lot of lights on the project. A $5,000 or $8,000 difference in fixtures multiplied times, I don't have the count, but it adds up a lot. So we want to have the option on, basically on cost management on the lights. My favorite lighting designer says, lighting is the most expensive thing you can do to decorate your street. So we just want to keep that in mind, that we want to use it and use it right. The other thing with the LEDs is the focus is illuminating the place. We're illuminating the streetscape, we're illuminating the sidewalks, we're illuminating the trees. People can see each other. We're not decorating it with glare or impacting people with glare. So actually the richness of the place, we put the money into really nice things to look at when they're illuminated, when the lights are on. Okay, as Ron mentioned also, we've got some stone walls. The biggest one is from the intersection up the hill on the sidewalk side. And so that's a wall that's going to be holding up almost, at some point it's almost 9 feet tall. So that's going to be holding up a lot of earth behind it. It's got to be a structural wall. So the normal way of building a wall like that is to build a big, strong concrete wall in the back. And then so that no one wants to look at 9 feet of concrete, is to face it with stone on the front. And this is done a tradition, this is sort of a more normal course of treatment of walls in historic settings for both community, town, as well as DOT projects. I believe this is a DOT project. So for the tall structural walls, we're looking at basically concrete with a stone veneer finish on the front that's mortared in place. And so then we have the question of what kind of stone. Where are we going to get the stone? How's it going to look? How are we going to course it? What's the look? So this is a fairly random sort of big field stone ledge. These pieces are, that's not a baby grand piano, but it's, that's certainly a couple of piano benches worth of, that's a lot of stone on some of these bigger pieces. So But the sense was, from the design review committee, was maybe we could do a little bit of order and try to bring it into what's, there's a pattern of stone called ashlar, which is a little more rectilinear. Now there can be very formal ashlar patterns of stone. It's probably on your library across the way, sort of very finely cut, beautifully crafted. But then there's also, you can just make it a little more organized. And so we're thinking that to try to basically not have just random broken pieces, but to have more squarish pieces. And the reason for that, in part, is because when we get to the low walls, as we get to, between, say, 2 and 4 feet of elevation retaining, which is in, a number of the other places, in addition to the street up the hill, is you've probably seen them around. The big granite blocks that are on railroad abutments, they're in building foundations. There's a hot market of availability of big granite blocks, and they make a wonderful sort of street edge. So this is actually a project out in Williamstown that our firm completed recently, and so they're used to basically hold the front yards of this house and other houses. This goes for several hundred feet using that. Now we can also take that block module and stack it and pin them together so that they structurally will all stand up. And so in some cases we have tall walls then tapering into this shorter wall here. So here's a double stack height version there. Now that's probably an old wall, but you get the same feeling for it. So this is an elevation view. So here's the intersection down here. That's the driveway up into the house right on the corner. Right here, this is looking at, here's Mass Ave going up the hill towards the high school. Here's the driveway for the old high school. So we have this wall that basically is from the driveway, almost driveway to driveway. And it starts low, and there's a low section for, we haven't plotted out the exact sort of engineering profile of it, but there's a low section, just say it's 30, 40, 50 feet, that's under 4 feet. And so that can be the stone blocks. And then we transition into the big concrete wall. But what we're thinking is that we can actually create a little bit of a sort of a stepping stone rhythm of the stone blocks in here, and then as we transition to the veneer, we can have the bottom courses of the veneer be the same size as the stone blocks. And so those will sort of, you see sort of a little bit of a stepping thing happening going up the hill here. And so they're stepping up in roughly 2-foot increments, which is the height of those stone blocks. So we kind of like that there could be some continuity of that along the length of the wall. And then above that, my favorite instructions to a mason is have a good time. Masons love to, they have their creativity and to listen to the stones. The stones tell them where to put them. And so let's let the mason, let's let a nice stonework project happen at the top. But I also need to just remind everybody that where we're above 30 inches, we have to have a fence on top. So we're thinking that probably some kind of planting bumped up right against it at the top will sort of conceal it and eventually grow it into, a hedge or a shrub border or something like that. And then we have opportunities where we have the steps, is we have little level areas where we can potentially replace some of the trees that need to be cut, because we have to cut way into the embankment to put the wall in place, and then we'll fill it back in and bring it back up. This is all the level of the play field up at the top. Here's the play field right here. So that's walls. So thank you. We're really excited about this place. The fact that it's going to take, sort of a congested local streets and turn it into sort of a really nice village center, and the bicycle components and the pedestrian design. And so the landscape component of this, what we're asking is for you just to, give us your thoughts about this. This is more going to go, at this point, become more of a conversation than a presentation. And so who wants to MC people? You want to MC, Ron? Or?